Deputy Jake Sullivan's radio crackled mid-sentence, his weathered hand frozen on Buddy's leash as the German shepherd's desperate whining pierced the Alabama afternoon silence. The barn wasn't empty. Mrs. Dorothy Patterson stumbled backward from the splintered wooden boards, her trembling fingers dropping the faded photograph of 8-year-old Lucy as Buddy's claws scraped frantically against something hollow beneath their feet. The sound that emerged from below, muffled, desperate, unmistakably human, sent ice through Jake's veins as he realized what 6 months of searching had led them to discover. "Dear Lord in heaven," Dorothy whispered, her voice cracking as childhood memories of this very farm collided with the horrifying present, remembering when Tommy Hendricks had been the kindest teacher she'd ever known. "Call for backup now," Jake commanded into his radio, though every instinct screamed this moment had already changed everything they thought they knew about their quiet community, who had been hiding beneath Millbrook County's most trusted ground, and how long had the children been crying for help while the whole town searched everywhere but here. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Millbrook County had been the kind of place where folks still left their doors unlocked and children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. Population 3,200, nestled in the heart of Alabama's cotton country, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Sunday church attendance was as regular as the morning coffee at Dixie's Diner. Deputy Jake Sullivan had called this place home for 15 years, ever since he'd returned from his second tour in Afghanistan with a Purple Heart and a need for quiet. At 48, his weathered face told stories of loss, his wife Sarah to cancer 7 years ago, his sister Rebecca to a drunk driver just 2 years past. Now he was raising 9-year-old Emma, Rebecca's daughter, on a deputy's salary that barely covered the mortgage on their small house on Magnolia Street. Jake's partner for the last 3 years had been Buddy, a 7-year-old German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and a past that remained largely mysterious. The dog had arrived at the county shelter as a malnourished puppy covered in scars that spoke of neglect and abuse. Something about Buddy's quiet determination had spoken to Jake's own wounded soul, and they'd become an inseparable team. Buddy had an uncanny ability to read people and situations, often alerting Jake to trouble before his human senses caught up. Mrs. Dorothy Patterson represented the soul of old Millbrook. At 72, she'd taught 3 generations of local children at Millbrook Elementary before retiring 10 years ago. Her small house on Elm Street, with its carefully tended garden and front porch swing, had become a refuge for anyone needing a listening ear or homemade biscuits. Since her husband Harold's death 15 years ago, her granddaughter Lucy had become the center of her world. Lucy Patterson, 8 years old, with gap-toothed grin and pigtails that never stayed neat, lived with her grandmother after her own parents died in a factory accident when she was 4. Dorothy had raised her with the fierce love of someone who'd already buried too many people she loved. Every Tuesday, they made their ritual trip to the town library for story time, Lucy clutching her grandmother's hand as they walked the 6 blocks through downtown. The peaceful rhythm of their lives had shattered 8 months ago when children started disappearing. First, Jessica Morrison, 12 years old, vanished from the county fair. Then Tyler Brooks, only 7, disappeared from his own backyard. Each disappearance sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community, but when Dr. Chen's daughter Sarah went missing from the school playground in broad daylight, panic set in. Thomas Hendricks had been Millbrook's most beloved elementary school principal for 28 years before retiring 6 months ago due to what the school board diplomatically called health concerns. At 58, Tom lived alone on the family farm that had been in the Hendricks name for 4 generations. The same farm where his 12-year-old son Marcus had loved to explore before that terrible day 5 years ago when a gunman walked into Pine Ridge Elementary and changed everything forever. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other. Dorothy Patterson had finished her morning coffee and was helping Lucy tie her sneakers when the little girl looked up with those bright blue eyes that reminded Dorothy so much of her late son. "Grandma Dot, can we stay extra long at story time today? Miss Jennifer said she's reading about a princess who saves a dragon instead of the other way around." Dorothy's heart squeezed with love as she smoothed Lucy's unruly blonde hair. "Of course, sugar. We've got nowhere else to be but right here with each other." The walk to Millbrook Public Library took them past the town square, where the bronze statue of a Confederate soldier stood surrounded by October's falling leaves. Dorothy waved to neighbors tending their shops, Betty at the flower store, old Mr. Henderson fixing the clock outside his watch repair shop, young Pastor Williams setting up chairs for the evening community meeting about the missing children. "Mrs. Patterson," called Jennifer Mills, the children's librarian, as they entered the building. "Lucy, I saved you a seat right up front for today's story." Dorothy settled into her usual chair in the back, content to watch Lucy's animated face as she listened to tales of brave princesses and magical kingdoms. For 45 minutes, the horror of missing children felt distant, replaced by the simple joy of watching her granddaughter's imagination soar. "Grandma, I need to use the little girl's room," Lucy whispered during the craft time that followed story hour. "All right, baby girl. You know where it is. I'll be right here when you get back." Dorothy returned to her conversation with Jennifer about the upcoming fall festival, glancing occasionally toward the restroom hallway. After 10 minutes, a flutter of concern began in her chest. "Jennifer, honey, I'm going to check on Lucy." The restroom was empty. Dorothy's voice echoed off the tile walls as she called Lucy's name, checking each stall twice. Her hands began to tremble as she hurried back to the main library. "She's not there. Lucy's not in the bathroom." The next hour became a blur of increasingly frantic activity. Jennifer checked every corner of the library while Dorothy ran outside, calling Lucy's name up and down Main Street. Within minutes, it seemed like half the town had joined the search. Jake Sullivan arrived with Buddy, who immediately began tracking Lucy's scent from the library's back exit. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to try to stay calm," Jake said gently, though his own face was grim. "Buddy's got her trail. She went out the back door here, across the parking lot." The trail led to the alley behind the library, where it stopped abruptly at tire marks in the gravel. Buddy circled frantically, whining with frustration as Jake examined the ground. "Someone picked her up here," Jake concluded, his jaw tight. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to think carefully. Did Lucy mention talking to anyone new lately? Anyone who might have approached her?" Dorothy's mind raced through recent conversations, her hands clutching the small pink sweater Lucy had left in the library. "No, no one. She's a careful child, Jake. I taught her about strangers. She wouldn't just go with someone unless—" "Unless what?" "Unless they convinced her it was safe somehow. Lucy trusts people who seem kind, especially if they mention me or someone she knows." Jake radioed for additional units while Buddy continued his agitated circling. Within an hour, the FBI had been notified, and Agent Sarah Martinez was en route from Birmingham. The community center became a command post, filled with volunteers organizing search parties and manning phone lines. As darkness fell, Dorothy sat in her empty kitchen, staring at the second-place setting she'd automatically put out for dinner. Every sound outside sent her heart racing to the window, hoping to see Lucy's blonde pigtails bouncing up the front walk. Jake arrived at 8 o'clock with coffee and the grim news that the search had yielded nothing more. Buddy lay at Dorothy's feet, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an anxious restlessness that mirrored her own. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know we're not giving up. Every law enforcement agency in 3 counties is looking for Lucy. The FBI is setting up a tip line, and we've got volunteers searching round the clock." Dorothy nodded numbly. though her teacher's instincts told her something was fundamentally wrong about this whole situation. In all her years of working with children, she'd developed an ability to sense when danger lurked beneath a calm surface. "Jake, there's something evil in our town, something that's been hiding in plain sight while we all went about our daily lives. Those other children, they didn't just vanish into thin air. Someone local is taking them, someone who knows our routines, our children, our weaknesses." As if in response to her words, Buddy lifted his head and released a low, mournful howl that seemed to echo every parent's worst nightmare. 2 weeks after Lucy's disappearance, the fragile hope that had sustained Millbrook County shattered completely when 10-year-old Amy Henderson vanished in broad daylight from the elementary school playground. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon, and Amy had been playing on the monkey bars with 3 other children when a maintenance worker approached the fence. The children later told police that the man seemed nice, wearing clean coveralls and speaking in a gentle voice. He'd pointed toward the far corner of the playground and said something about a lost puppy that needed help. Amy was always the helper. Her mother, Linda Henderson, sobbed to Jake during the interview. If someone said an animal needed help, she'd go running. That's just who she was. The other children watched Amy walk toward the fence line, expecting her to return within minutes. When the lunch bell rang and Amy wasn't among the students lining up, teacher Patricia Wright immediately called the office. By the time Jake and Buddy arrived, Amy had been missing for nearly an hour. Buddy's tracking led them through the playground, past the swing sets, and around the school building to the rear parking lot. There, the scent trail ended abruptly near fresh tire marks in the gravel. Jake studied the impressions. Wide tires, possibly a pickup truck or van. "Same pattern as Lucy," Jake muttered into his radio. "Professional pickup, planned route, no witnesses to the actual abduction." Agent Martinez arrived within the hour, her face grim as she surveyed the scene. A veteran of child abduction cases, she immediately ordered roadblocks on all major routes leading out of the county. "We're dealing with someone local," she announced at the emergency task force meeting that evening. "Someone who knows these children's routines, the school schedules, the community patterns. This isn't random." Dorothy Patterson sat in the back of the crowded community center, her weathered hands gripping a photograph of Lucy. The past 2 weeks had aged her dramatically. Hollow cheeks, sleepless eyes, trembling fingers that constantly worried her late husband's wedding ring. "Agent Martinez," Dorothy spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who'd spent 40 years commanding classroom attention. "I've been thinking about the timeline. All these disappearances, they've happened during normal, everyday activities. Library time, playground, walking to the store. Someone's been watching our children, learning their habits." The room murmured agreement, parents pulling their own children closer as the horrifying implications sank in. "Mrs. Patterson raises an excellent point," Martinez nodded. "We need to examine anyone who has regular contact with children in this community. Teachers, coaches, volunteers, maintenance workers, anyone with legitimate reasons to observe children's routines." As the meeting continued, Jake noticed Buddy's increasingly agitated behavior. The German Shepherd had been restless for days, refusing meals and pacing constantly. Tonight, something seemed to be triggering intense anxiety in the dog. After the meeting, Jake decided to drive the patrol routes where previous searches had been conducted. Buddy rode in the passenger seat, alert and tense. They passed the abandoned cotton mill, the old railway bridge, and several farms that had been foreclosed during the recent economic downturn. As they approached the Hendricks property on rural Route 47, Buddy suddenly erupted into frantic barking. The dog's entire body went rigid, his hackles rising as he stared toward the darkened farmhouse and outbuildings. "What is it, boy?" Jake pulled over, studying the property through his windshield. The Hendricks farm had been in the family for generations. 200 acres of cotton fields, a modest two-story farmhouse, and several weathered barns that dated back to the 1940s. Thomas Hendricks lived there alone since retiring from his principal position. Buddy's barking intensified, his claws scratching at the passenger window. Jake had never seen his partner react so violently to any location. The dog seemed desperate to get out of the vehicle and investigate the property. "Easy, Buddy, easy." Jake tried to calm the agitated animal, but Buddy continued his distressed vocalizations. Something about this place was triggering every protective instinct the dog possessed. Jake made a mental note to return during daylight hours and drove home, though Buddy remained agitated throughout the night, pacing and whining until exhaustion finally claimed him. The next morning brought devastating news. A homeless man named Carl Dexter had been arrested after a tip led police to a camp in the woods near the interstate. In his possession, they'd found children's clothing and a notebook with disturbing drawings. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief, convinced the nightmare was finally over. But Dorothy Patterson couldn't shake her unease. Something felt wrong about the arrest, too convenient, too neat. During her 40 years of teaching, she'd developed an instinct for when children were telling the truth versus reciting rehearsed stories. This situation triggered the same suspicious feeling. "Jake, I know everyone wants this to be over," she said when he stopped by her house that afternoon. "But I don't think that homeless man took our children. Someone wanted us to find him." Jake nodded grimly. "Buddy doesn't think it's over either. He's still agitated, still searching. Dogs don't lie, Mrs. Patterson. If he's telling us something's still wrong, then something's still wrong." Meanwhile, at the Hendricks farm, Thomas Hendricks stood at his kitchen window watching the news coverage of Carl Dexter's arrest on his tablet. His graying hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean and pressed, the same meticulous appearance he'd maintained throughout his teaching career. To any observer, he appeared to be just another concerned community member relieved that the threat had been eliminated. But if someone had looked closer, they might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, or the way his eyes kept darting toward the old cotton barn visible through his window. They might have observed how he unconsciously touched the pocket containing the key to a room that officially didn't exist, a space he'd carefully constructed beneath the barn floor. In his mind, Thomas wasn't a criminal. He was a protector, a teacher continuing the most important lesson of his career. The children in his care were safe from the violence and corruption of the outside world. They had structure, routine, education, everything his beloved son Marcus had been denied by a society that failed to protect its most vulnerable members. As he watched the news anchor discuss Carl Dexter's alleged crimes, Thomas felt a mixture of relief and pride. The police had found their scapegoat, and his classroom could continue its vital work undisturbed. The children would understand eventually. They would thank him for saving them from a world that had stolen Marcus from him, just as it had nearly stolen his purpose for living. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of Buddy's barking echoing across the fields from the direction of the main road, and Thomas smiled grimly. Even dogs, it seemed, could sense the importance of the work being done here. The arrest of Carl Dexter should have brought peace to Millbrook County, but instead it seemed to amplify the underlying tension that had been building for months. While the official investigation wound down, Jake found himself unable to shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Buddy's behavior had only grown more erratic since the arrest, and the German Shepherd's instincts had never steered him wrong before. 3 days after Dexter's arrest, Jake made the decision to follow up on Buddy's fixation with the Hendricks property. He'd known Tom Hendricks peripherally for years, a respected educator who'd dedicated his life to teaching children before tragedy struck his family. The man had lost his only son in a school shooting 5 years ago, followed by his wife's suicide 2 years later. If anyone deserved sympathy and privacy, it was Tom Hendricks. But Jake had learned to trust his partner's judgment above all else, even when it led to uncomfortable conversations. He drove to the Hendricks farm on a gray Saturday morning, Buddy riding tensely in the passenger seat. As they turned into the long gravel driveway, Buddy's agitation increased dramatically. The dog began panting heavily, his ears pinned back against his head in a display of anxiety Jake had rarely witnessed. Thomas Hendricks emerged from his farmhouse before Jake even had a chance to knock. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His appearance was immaculate despite the early hour: pressed khakis, clean flannel shirt, and work boots that showed little evidence of actual farm labor. "Deputy Sullivan," Tom called out with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What brings you out this way? I hope there's not more trouble." Jake studied the man's face, searching for any hint of deception. "Just following up on some loose ends, Mr. Hendricks. Mind if I ask where you were last Thursday afternoon when the Henderson girl went missing?" "Of course not. I was here, working on some repairs in the barn." Tom gestured toward the weathered structure about 50 yards from the house. "Been meaning to fix some loose boards before winter sets in. Age catches up with everything eventually, I suppose." Buddy's behavior became increasingly agitated as they talked, the dog pulling toward the barn with single-minded determination. Jake noticed Tom's eyes flicker nervously toward the German shepherd several times during their conversation. "That's quite a dog you have there," Tom commented, his voice carefully neutral. "Very alert." "Buddy's been a bit off lately," Jake admitted, watching Tom's reaction. "Ever since the children started disappearing, he's been sensing something that I can't quite pin down." "Dogs have a way of knowing things we miss." A shadow crossed Tom's face so quickly that Jake almost missed it. Animals can be unpredictable during stressful times. Perhaps the whole community's anxiety is affecting him. Jake nodded non-committally, but made note of how Tom kept his distance from Buddy throughout their conversation. Most people were drawn to the friendly German shepherd, but Tom seemed almost afraid of the dog's presence. "Would you mind if we took a quick look around?" "Just routine follow-up, nothing official." Tom hesitated for just a moment too long before agreeing. "Of course, though there's not much to see. Just an old farm trying to keep from falling down completely." As they walked toward the barn, Buddy's excitement reached a fever pitch. The dog strained against his leash, whining and pawing at the ground near the barn's entrance. Jake noticed that Tom kept glancing at his watch as if he had somewhere else to be. "This barn's got good bones," Jake commented, examining the structure. "Must be, 60, 70 years old?" "Built by my grandfather in 1953, Tom replied, with what seemed like genuine pride. "He always said if you build something right the first time, it'll last forever." Of course, that was back when people took pride in their craftsmanship. Buddy's attention focused on a specific section of the barn floor where the wooden planks seemed slightly newer than the surrounding boards. The dog began digging frantically at the wood, his claws scraping against the grain with desperate intensity. "Buddy, no!" Jake commanded, but the dog ignored him completely, something that had never happened before in their 3 years of partnership. Tom watched the dog's behavior with what appeared to be growing alarm. "Deputy, perhaps you should get your dog under control. He's damaging the floor." Jake knelt down beside Buddy, running his hands over the wooden planks. They felt different somehow. The wood was slightly warmer, and when he pressed down, there was an almost imperceptible give that suggested hollow space beneath. "Mr. Hendricks, what's under this section of floor?" Tom's face went pale. "Nothing. Just the foundation. Old barns like this, sometimes the wood settles unevenly." But Buddy had found something. The dog was now pawing at a small gap between 2 planks, whining with an urgency that made Jake's blood run cold. As he examined the area more closely, Jake noticed that several boards appeared to have been recently removed and replaced. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back while I investigate this further." Tom's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "Deputy Sullivan, I think you're overreacting. It's just an old barn with some loose floorboards. Surely you have more important things to—" Buddy's whining suddenly intensified, and in the silence that followed, Jake heard something that made his heart stop. It was faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably human. The sound of muffled crying coming from beneath their feet. Jake's training kicked in instantly. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to move away from this area immediately and place your hands where I can see them." Tom's mask finally slipped completely, revealing a combination of panic and resignation. "You don't understand, Deputy. I'm not hurting them. I'm protecting them. The world out there, it's dangerous, corrupt. These children are safe here. They're learning, growing, becoming better than they ever could have in that poisoned society." Jake's hand moved to his weapon, while his other hand reached for his radio. "All units, I need immediate backup at the Hendricks farm on rural Route 47. Possible location of missing children." "I gave them structure," Tom continued, his voice rising with desperation. "Education! Safety! Do you know what happened to my Marcus out there? Do you know what this world does to innocent children?" Buddy had found a section of floor that gave way slightly under pressure. Jake could hear movement below, shuffling sounds, whispered voices, and what sounded like someone trying to comfort crying children. "Sir, I need you to tell me how to access whatever space is beneath this floor, right now." Tom's eyes darted between Jake and the barn door, calculating his chances of escape. But Buddy had positioned himself between Tom and the exit, the dog's protective instincts finally overriding his confusion about his former owner. "You're making a mistake," Tom said quietly. "I'm not the monster here. I'm the one trying to save them from the monsters." Jake's radio crackled with confirmation that backup was en route, but he estimated they were still 15 minutes away. 15 minutes during which he needed to maintain control of an increasingly unstable situation while potentially traumatized children waited in whatever space lay beneath the barn floor. Meanwhile, Dorothy Patterson was experiencing her own moment of terrible clarity. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing old-school records and newspaper clippings, when a memory surfaced that made her blood run cold. She remembered a conversation with Tom Hendricks from years ago, back when he was still teaching. He'd expressed concerns about modern parenting, about children being exposed to too much too young. At the time, she'd dismissed it as the normal worries of a dedicated educator. But now, with Lucy missing and her teacher's instincts screaming that something was wrong, Dorothy began to see patterns she'd missed before. Tom's early retirement, his increasing isolation, his obsessive focus on child safety that had become a running topic in faculty meetings. She remembered how he'd reacted to news of each disappearance, not with the shock and horror of other community members, but with what she now recognized as guilty knowledge. Dorothy grabbed her car keys and headed for the Hendricks farm, driven by a certainty that made her hands shake. She'd taught that man, watched him grow from an idealistic young teacher into someone consumed by grief and fear. If Tom had taken these children, she might be the only person who could reach whatever humanity remained in him. As her old Buick rattled down rural Route 47, Dorothy could see police cars converging on the Hendricks property in the distance, their red and blue lights painting the gray autumn sky with urgent color. The standoff in the barn stretched into an agonizing eternity as Jake waited for backup while maintaining his weapon trained on Tom Hendricks. Buddy had positioned himself between Tom and the section of floor where the children's voices could be heard, the German Shepherd's body rigid with protective tension. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to show me how to access the space below," Jake repeated, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Those children need medical attention, and every second counts." Tom's face had taken on an almost serene expression, as if he'd moved beyond panic into some sort of resigned acceptance. "You really don't understand what you're destroying here, do you? I've created something pure, something safe. These children haven't been exposed to violence, to hatred, to the poison that killed my Marcus." From beneath the floor, Jake could hear what sounded like a child coughing, a wet, concerning sound that suggested illness. His jaw tightened as he realized how long some of these children might have been in captivity. "Sir, whatever your intentions were, those children need fresh air, medical care, and their families. Now show me the access point." Tom's eyes grew distant, as if he were seeing something beyond the present moment. Marcus would have been 17 now. Did you know that? 17 years old, probably getting ready for his senior prom, thinking about college. Instead, he's been dead for 5 years because this world couldn't protect a 12-year-old boy from a madman with a gun. Buddy's whining grew more urgent, and Jake could swear he heard a child's voice calling for help from below. The sound was muffled but desperate, and it took every ounce of his professional training to remain calm. "I understand you lost your son," Jake said carefully. "I can't imagine that pain. But taking other people's children isn't going to bring Marcus back." "I'm not trying to bring him back." Tom's composure cracked, his voice rising to near shouting. "I'm trying to save them from becoming him, from becoming victims of a society that's forgotten how to protect its children." The distant sound of sirens grew closer, and Jake estimated backup would arrive within 5 minutes. But 5 minutes felt like an eternity when he could hear children in distress below his feet. "Please," Jake tried a different approach. "If you care about these children the way you cared about Marcus, help me get them medical attention. Whatever happens next, don't let them suffer because of adult decisions." Tom's resolve seemed to waver for a moment. He looked toward a corner of the barn where Jake now noticed a section of wall that appeared to be a concealed door. "The entrance is behind those feed sacks. There's a ladder down to the classroom." Just then, Dorothy Patterson's voice called from outside the barn. "Tommy? Tommy Hendricks? You come out here right now and talk to me." Tom's head snapped toward the sound, his face draining of color. "Mrs. Patterson, what is she doing here?" "That's between you and her," Jake replied, though he felt a surge of concern for the elderly woman. "But right now, my priority is getting those children out safely." Dorothy appeared in the barn doorway, her silver hair disheveled and her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and heartbreak that only a veteran teacher could muster. "Thomas Hendricks, I taught you better than this. I taught you that education comes from love, not fear." "Mrs. Patterson, you need to leave," Jake said firmly. "This is a police situation." But Dorothy ignored him completely, her attention focused entirely on Tom. "I remember when you first started teaching, Tommy. You were so full of hope, so excited about making a difference in children's lives. What happened to that young man?" Tom's weapon wavered as he stared at his former mentor. "They killed him, Mrs. Patterson. They killed him the same day they killed Marcus. This world destroyed everything I believed in." "No, honey." Dorothy stepped closer, her voice gentle but unwavering. "This world took something precious from you. But you chose what to do with that pain. You chose to let it turn you into something Marcus would never recognize." Buddy sensed the shift in tension and moved closer to the concealed entrance, his nose working frantically at the gap beneath the hidden door. From below came the sound of multiple children's voices, some crying, some trying to comfort others. "Mrs. Patterson, please," Tom's voice broke. "I was protecting them, just like I tried to protect Marcus, just like I failed to protect Marcus." "Oh, Tommy." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't fail Marcus. You loved him, you taught him, you gave him everything a father could give. That madman who took him from us, that wasn't your failure. Jake used the emotional moment to edge closer to the concealed entrance, keeping his weapon ready but hoping to avoid using it in front of traumatized children. The sirens were getting louder, and he could see red and blue lights beginning to flash through the barn's windows. "But I can't lose them too," Tom whispered, his gun now pointing toward the floor rather than at Jake. "If I let them go back to that world, something terrible will happen to them. Something like what happened to Marcus." "Tommy, listen to me." Dorothy's voice carried the authority of 4 decades in the classroom. "Lucy is my granddaughter. Those other children have grandparents too, parents who love them just as much as you loved Marcus. You're not protecting them from the world, you're stealing them from the people who love them most." Tom's face crumpled as the full weight of his action seemed to hit him for the first time. Oh God, what have I done? I thought I was saving them." Jake moved swiftly toward the hidden entrance while Tom was distracted by his emotional breakdown. Behind the feed sacks, he found a section of the wall that swung open to reveal a steep wooden ladder descending into darkness. The smell that rose from below made his stomach turn, a mixture of fear, confinement, and human waste that spoke of prolonged captivity. "Children," Jake called down. "This is Deputy Sullivan with the Sheriff's Department. You're safe now." "I'm coming down to help you." Backup units burst through the barn doors just as Jake began his descent into what Tom had called his classroom. Agent Martinez was among the first responders, her face grim as she took in the scene. Tom Hendricks collapsed in sobs, Dorothy Patterson kneeling beside him like a mother comforting a troubled child, and Buddy pacing anxiously at the top of the hidden entrance. The space below was larger than Jake had expected. A finished room about 12 feet by 20 feet, with fluorescent lighting powered by an extension cord from the barn above. What he saw made his blood run cold. 6 children, ranging in age from 7 to 12, sat at small school desks arranged in neat rows. A chalkboard at the front of the room displayed a daily schedule: 8 a.m. breakfast, 9 a.m. mathematics, 10 a.m. reading, 11 a.m. character building. Lucy Patterson was among them, thinner than when she'd disappeared but alive and alert. She looked up at Jake with eyes that held too much knowledge for an 8-year-old child. "Are you here to take us back to the bad place?" she asked in a small voice. Jake's heart broke as he realized what these children had been told about the outside world. "No, sweetheart. I'm here to take you home to your Grandma Dot. She's been looking for you every single day since you've been gone." The medical team that followed Jake into the underground room found children suffering from malnutrition, vitamin deficiency, and the psychological trauma of prolonged captivity, but miraculously, none appeared to have been physically harmed beyond the effects of confinement. Tom's delusion had apparently included a genuine belief that he was caring for them, providing basic needs while indoctrinating them with his twisted worldview. As the children were carefully brought to the surface, Buddy seemed to transform before everyone's eyes. The anxious, agitated dog that had been searching desperately for weeks suddenly became gentle and comforting, allowing each child to pet him as they emerged into the daylight. It was as if the German Shepherd understood that his mission was complete. He had found them, and now his job was to help them heal. Dorothy was reunited with Lucy in a moment that brought tears to every hardened law enforcement officer present. The grandmother and granddaughter clung to each other as if they were afraid one might disappear again, while Buddy sat protectively beside them, his tail wagging for the first time in weeks. "I knew you'd find me, Grandma Dot," Lucy whispered. "The teacher man said you forgot about me, but I knew that wasn't true." "Never, baby girl," Dorothy sobbed. "Never in a million years would I forget about you." 3 days after the rescue, Millbrook County Hospital's pediatric wing had been transformed into a fortress of healing and protection. The 6 recovered children occupied a special secure ward surrounded by child psychologists, social workers, and medical staff working around the clock to address both their physical and emotional needs. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose own daughter had been among the rescued children, found herself in the heartbreaking position of treating her own child while maintaining professional objectivity. 10-year-old Sarah Chen Jr. had lost 15 pounds during her captivity and showed signs of severe anxiety, flinching whenever adults approached too quickly. "She keeps asking if she's being punished," Dr. Chen confided to Jake during one of his visits. Tom convinced them that the outside world was dangerous, that their families had sent them away for their own protection. Undoing that psychological damage is going to take months, maybe years. Jake nodded grimly, watching through the observation window as Buddy worked his gentle magic with the children. The German Shepherd had become an unofficial therapy dog, spending hours each day in the ward simply being present while the children slowly remembered what safety felt like. Lucy Patterson presented perhaps the most complex case. As the youngest of the group, she had been most susceptible to Tom's indoctrination, but she also showed remarkable resilience. During her psychological evaluation, she told Dr. Williams that she had never stopped believing her grandmother would find her. "The teacher man showed us pictures on his computer," Lucy explained, in a voice that was too mature for her 8 years. "Pictures of bad things happening to children in the world. He said our families were keeping us safe by letting us live in his school." Dorothy Patterson rarely left Lucy's bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and reading endless stories to help her granddaughter remember the joy that existed beyond the underground classroom. But even Dorothy was struggling with her own psychological trauma, the guilt of not recognizing the signs earlier, the horror of discovering that someone she had mentored could commit such acts. "I keep thinking about all the conversations we had over the years," Dorothy confided to Jake. "How did I miss that he was becoming so twisted? How did I not see that grief was turning him into a monster?" The investigation into Tom's methods revealed the sophisticated nature of his operation. FBI analysis of his computer showed months of careful planning, surveillance of local families, and research into child psychology. He had created detailed profiles of each child, identifying those he perceived as being at risk from what he called societal corruption. Agent Martinez's team discovered that Tom had been using his position as principal to identify vulnerable children, those from single-parent homes, families facing financial stress, or children showing signs of behavioral problems. His twisted logic convinced him that he was rescuing them from inevitable harm. He wasn't operating from malice, Martinez explained to the gathered parents and community members. In his deluded mind, he genuinely believed he was saving these children, which in some ways makes it more terrifying. He passed every psychological screening for his teaching position because he truly believed he was doing good. The community's reaction was a complex mixture of relief, rage, and soul-searching. How had Tom Hendricks, beloved educator and grieving father, transformed into someone capable of stealing children? The school board faced intense scrutiny over their failure to recognize warning signs, and several members resigned in the wake of the scandal. Pastor Williams organized daily prayer services at the Baptist Church, but attendance was down as people struggled to reconcile their faith with the reality that evil could wear such a familiar face. Many parents questioned their own judgment. How many times had they trusted Tom with their children during his years as principal? The most heartbreaking aspect of the entire situation was Tom himself. Held in isolation at the county jail pending federal charges, he had suffered what psychiatrists termed a complete psychological break. The man who had meticulously planned and executed the kidnappings now seemed genuinely confused about why he was being held. "He keeps asking to see his students," reported Dr. Mitchell, the court-appointed psychiatrist. He's created an elaborate fantasy where he's still protecting them from danger. When we try to explain that he kidnapped 6 children, he becomes agitated and insists that their parents asked him to keep them safe. Jake found himself visiting Tom against his better judgment, trying to understand how someone could cause so much pain while believing they were doing good. During one particularly difficult conversation, Tom looked at Jake with eyes that seemed genuinely confused. "Deputy Sullivan, when can I return to my classroom? The children need their lessons. They need structure and safety. Surely you understand that education is the key to protecting them from the world's corruption." "Mr. Hendricks," Jake said carefully, "those children are with their families now. They're safe." Tom's face darkened with what appeared to be genuine concern. No, that's not right. Their families aren't equipped to protect them. That's why they brought them to me. That's why I built the school." The most disturbing revelation came when investigators discovered Tom's journals, dating back to shortly after his son's death. The entries showed a gradual descent from normal grief into obsessive planning. Early entries focused on his pain and anger at a world that couldn't protect children. Middle entries began developing theories about pure education and protective environments. Final entries detailed his plans for creating the underground classroom and his selection criteria for students. One entry, dated just weeks before Lucy's disappearance, read, "The children of this community are being poisoned by exposure to violence, sexuality, and moral corruption. Their parents love them, but lack the knowledge to protect them properly. I must save them before it's too late, just as I failed to save Marcus." Meanwhile, Buddy was experiencing his own form of trauma recovery. The German Shepherd had been exhibiting signs of severe stress since the rescue: loss of appetite, restlessness, and an almost obsessive need to check on the children at the hospital. Jake consulted with a veterinary behaviorist who explained that working dogs could experience PTSD just like their human counterparts. "He's been carrying this burden for weeks," Dr. Martinez explained. "His instincts told him something was wrong, but he couldn't communicate the specifics to you. Now that the children are safe, he's processing the stress of that responsibility." The breakthrough came when Lucy asked if Buddy could visit her room. As soon as the German Shepherd saw that she was safe, eating and surrounded by people who loved her, his entire demeanor changed. His tail wagged for the first time since the rescue, and he settled peacefully at the foot of her hospital bed. "He was worried about us," Lucy told her grandmother with the wisdom that trauma sometimes brings to children. "He knew we were scared and alone. That's why he kept looking for us." The town's healing process was complicated by media attention that brought reporters from across the country to tiny Millbrook County. The story of the heroic K-9 who saved 6 kidnapped children from their delusional former principal became national news. But the attention came at a cost. Families trying to rebuild their lives found themselves constantly approached by journalists seeking interviews and sound bites. Dorothy Patterson became the unofficial spokesperson for the families, her decades of experience dealing with difficult situations serving her well in managing the media circus. But even she struggled with the constant questions about how the community had failed to protect its children. "We're not perfect people," she told one persistent reporter. "We trusted someone we shouldn't have trusted, and we missed signs we should have caught. But we're also the same community that never stopped looking for these children, that brought them home, and that's going to spend however long it takes helping them heal." As the first week after the rescue drew to a close, the children began showing signs of recovery. Amy Henderson had started eating solid foods again. Tyler Brooks was sleeping through the night without nightmares. Michael Rodriguez had asked to see his father's crops, wanting to remember what the outside world actually looked like. But for all of them, the road ahead remained long and uncertain. The innocence that Tom Hendricks had claimed to protect was gone forever, replaced by knowledge that evil could wear a kind face and speak in gentle words. The only constant in their healing process was Buddy, who seemed to understand that his job was far from over. The German Shepherd, who had refused to give up searching, now refused to give up guarding, becoming a living symbol of loyalty, protection, and unconditional love. The truth about Buddy's connection to Tom Hendricks emerged 3 weeks after the rescue, during what should have been a routine debriefing session. Jake was reviewing case files with Agent Martinez when she pulled up the background check they'd run on Tom during the initial investigation. "There's something here that doesn't make sense," Martinez said, pointing to a section of the report. According to animal control records, the Hendricks family owned a German Shepherd puppy that was reported missing in 2018. The dog was never found. Jake felt his blood run cold as he read the details. A 7-week-old German Shepherd puppy, brown and tan coloring, had disappeared from the Hendricks property shortly after Marcus's funeral. The family had filed a report but never followed up, claiming they were too grief-stricken to continue searching. 2018, Jake whispered. "That's the same year Buddy showed up at the shelter as a malnourished puppy." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Buddy hadn't just been tracking the missing children. He'd been confronting the man who had abandoned him during his most vulnerable period. The dog's agitated behavior around Tom wasn't just professional instinct. It was personal trauma, mixed with an unshakable sense of duty. Jake immediately drove to the veterinary clinic where Buddy had been treated upon arrival at the shelter. Dr. Rebecca Morris, the veterinarian who had nursed the puppy back to health, pulled the old medical records with trembling hands. "I remember this case clearly," she said, studying the documentation. "This puppy had been severely neglected, malnourished, dehydrated, covered in ticks and fleas. But the strangest thing was his behavior. Most abused animals are either aggressive or completely withdrawn. This one was different. He was alert, protective, almost like he was waiting for something." The medical records showed that Buddy had been found approximately 3 miles from the Hendricks farm, suggesting he had wandered for days or possibly weeks before being discovered by a Good Samaritan. The timeline matched perfectly with the period following Marcus's death and the family's subsequent emotional collapse. "Dr. Morris," Jake asked carefully, "in your professional opinion, would a puppy that young survive that long on his own?" "Not without help," she replied immediately. "Either he was extraordinarily lucky, or someone was providing minimal care, just enough to keep him alive but not enough to keep him healthy. It's almost like someone was feeding him occasionally but couldn't bear to actually take care of him." The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with horrifying clarity. Tom Hendricks hadn't just abandoned Buddy, he'd kept him barely alive while being unable to cope with the dog's presence. The puppy that had been Marcus's beloved companion had become a living reminder of everything Tom had lost, too painful to keep, but too connected to Marcus to simply dispose of. When Jake returned to the hospital to check on the children, he found Buddy lying beside Lucy's bed, the same position he'd maintained for hours each day since the rescue. But now Jake saw the dog's behavior in an entirely different light. Buddy wasn't just protecting these children, he was making sure they didn't suffer the abandonment he had experienced. "You knew him, didn't you, boy?" Jake whispered, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "You knew Tom from before, and you still tried to save those kids." Dorothy Patterson, who had been reading to Lucy, looked up with sharp interest. "What do you mean, Jake?" Jake shared the discovery about Buddy's connection to the Hendricks family, watching as understanding dawned in Dorothy's eyes. She had taught long enough to recognize the profound significance of what they'd learned. "That dog saved the children who belonged to the man who abandoned him," she said softly. "Lord have mercy." The revelation prompted Agent Martinez to dig deeper into the Hendricks family history. What she discovered painted a picture of a household that had completely collapsed following Marcus's death. Neighbors reported that the family had stopped maintaining their property, that Tom had become increasingly erratic, and that his wife Elizabeth had barely spoken to anyone in the months before her suicide. According to the neighbors we interviewed, Martinez reported, Elizabeth Hendricks blamed herself for Marcus's death because she hadn't volunteered to chaperone the field trip that day. Tom blamed the school system, the government, society in general. They stopped communicating with each other entirely. The medical examiner's report on Elizabeth's suicide revealed that she had left a note mentioning her inability to care for even the dog that Marcus loved. The implication was clear. In their grief, both parents had found Buddy's presence unbearable, but neither could bring themselves to properly rehome him. Dr. Williams, the child psychologist treating the rescued children, was fascinated by the psychological implications of Buddy's story. This dog experienced abandonment trauma at a critical developmental period, was rescued and rehabilitated, then chose to dedicate his life to protecting children. It's almost like he transformed his own trauma into a mission to prevent others from experiencing abandonment. The children's reactions to learning about Buddy's connection to their captor varied dramatically. Amy Henderson, the oldest, was initially angry that no one had told her sooner. Tyler Brooks seemed confused about how the same man could have abandoned Buddy and then tried to protect them. But Lucy Patterson's response surprised everyone. "Buddy understands," she said simply. "He knows what it feels like to be scared and alone, so he made sure we wouldn't stay scared and alone." The revelation also provided new insight into Tom's psychological state during the kidnappings. Child psychiatrist Dr. Sarah Mitchell theorized that Tom's inability to care for Buddy had been an early sign of his deteriorating mental health. Abandoning his son's dog was probably one of the first major breaks with his previous value system, she explained. The guilt from that abandonment may have actually contributed to his compulsive need to save other children. In his delusional mind, he was trying to make amends for his earlier failure. Jake found himself struggling with conflicting emotions about the man he'd arrested. While Tom's crimes were unforgivable, understanding the depth of his psychological breakdown made it impossible to view him as simply evil. The man had lost his son, his wife, and his sanity, then compounded his tragedy by abandoning the one living connection to his former happiness. When Jake shared these insights with Buddy during their evening walk, the German Shepherd seemed to understand more than any human could. The dog's behavior had changed since the truth emerged. He was calmer, more settled, as if some internal conflict had been resolved. "You forgave him, didn't you?" Jake asked, studying his partner's peaceful expression. "Even after everything he put you through, you forgave him enough to save those kids." Buddy's response was to lean against Jake's leg, a gesture of trust and affection that spoke volumes about the dog's capacity for healing. Whatever trauma Buddy had experienced as a puppy, he had transformed it into an unshakable commitment to protecting the innocent. The story of Buddy's connection to Tom Hendricks eventually became public, adding another layer to the media coverage that continued to follow the case. But for the families involved, it provided a sense of cosmic justice. The man who had abandoned a vulnerable puppy was ultimately brought to justice by that same dog, grown strong and determined to protect other innocents. Most importantly, it gave the rescued children a powerful symbol of resilience and forgiveness, showing them that even the deepest wounds could heal into strength when nurtured by love and purpose. 6 months after the rescue, Millbrook County had settled into a new rhythm that acknowledged both the scars of its ordeal and the strength of its recovery. The abandoned Hendricks farm had been purchased by the county and transformed into something Tom never could have imagined, a community center dedicated to child safety and family support services. Dorothy Patterson stood on the front porch of the renovated farmhouse, watching as construction workers put the finishing touches on what would become the Buddy Foundation for Child Protection. At 73, she had found new purpose as the Foundation's director, channeling her grief and determination into creating something positive from the community's darkest chapter. "Grandma Dot, look what Buddy found!" Lucy's voice rang out across the yard as she ran toward the porch, her blonde pigtails bouncing with an energy that had been absent for months after her rescue. In her hands, she carried a tennis ball that Buddy had unearthed from somewhere near the old barn site. The barn itself had been demolished, replaced by a memorial garden where families could come to reflect and remember. At its center stood a bronze statue of a German shepherd with one paw raised, alert and protective. The inscription read, "For those who hear us even when we're too scared to speak." Jake Sullivan approached from the parking area, Emma skipping beside him. His niece had formed a close bond with Lucy during the healing process, and both girls had benefited from having someone their own age who understood the importance of feeling safe. Jake had been promoted to detective following the Hendricks case, but he remained partnered with Buddy, who had become something of a local celebrity. "How's our hero doing today?" Dorothy asked, scratching behind Buddy's ears as the German shepherd settled contentedly at her feet. "He's been certified as a therapy dog," Jake announced with pride. "Dr. Williams says he has an instinctive understanding of trauma that's remarkable even for a trained professional." Indeed, Buddy had become an integral part of the healing process for all the rescued children. His presence during therapy sessions helped them feel safe enough to talk about their experiences, and his gentle nature provided comfort during their darkest moments. The dog seemed to understand exactly how to approach each child, playful with those who needed distraction, calm with those who needed peace. Amy Henderson had been among the most challenging cases, her preteen awareness making it harder for her to process what had happened to her. But Buddy's patient presence during her sessions had gradually helped her open up about her fears and anger. She was now back in school, though she still required regular counseling sessions. Tyler Brooks, the youngest boy, had initially been too frightened to speak at all after his rescue, but Buddy's gentle persistence had eventually coaxed him out of his silence. Now Tyler rarely went anywhere without asking if the hero dog could come along, and his parents had started discussing getting a dog of their own. Michael Rodriguez had returned to helping his father on their small farm, but he credited Buddy with teaching him that strength could be gentle. "Buddy's the strongest dog I know," he told his counselor, "but he's never scary. He just makes you feel safe." The community's relationship with law enforcement had evolved as well. Jake's careful handling of the crisis, combined with Buddy's heroism, had strengthened trust between residents and police. The sheriff's department had expanded their K-9 program, with Buddy serving as the template for training other dogs in both detection and therapy work. Thomas Hendricks remained in a secure psychiatric facility, his mental health having deteriorated significantly since his arrest. The federal charges against him had been modified to account for his psychological state, resulting in a sentence that prioritized treatment over punishment. He rarely spoke coherently anymore, though staff reported that he sometimes asked about his students and whether they were continuing their lessons. Dr. Mitchell, his attending psychiatrist, believed that Tom's mind had retreated so far into delusion that he might never fully comprehend the reality of his actions. "He's created an alternate narrative where he's still protecting children from danger," she explained to the families during a victim impact session. "It's his mind's way of protecting itself from the weight of what he actually did." Dorothy had surprised everyone by visiting Tom once, accompanied by a chaplain and Dr. Mitchell. She never spoke publicly about what was said during that visit, but those close to her noticed a subtle change afterward, a sense of peace that suggested she had found a way to reconcile her memories of the young teacher she had mentored with the broken man he had become. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she told Jake one afternoon as they watched the children play in the memorial garden. "It means choosing not to let someone else's broken heart break yours forever. The Buddy Foundation had already received funding to expand beyond Millbrook County, with plans to establish similar centers in rural communities throughout Alabama. The program would focus on early intervention, community education, and supporting families in crisis. All the things that might have prevented Tom's transformation from grief-stricken father to delusional kidnapper. Local schools had implemented new safety protocols and mental health resources, with particular attention paid to recognizing the warning signs of adults who might pose risks to children. The tragedy had taught the community that evil rarely announced itself with obvious signs. More often it hid behind familiar faces and good intentions gone terribly wrong. As the sun began to set over the memorial garden, casting long shadows across the bronze statue, the gathered families shared a moment of quiet gratitude. 6 children who should have been lost forever were home, healing, and learning to trust the world again. A dog who had been abandoned and forgotten had become a symbol of resilience and unconditional love. "You know what I think?" Lucy said, settling beside Buddy on the grass and wrapping her small arms around his neck. "I think heroes don't always have to be big and strong. Sometimes they just have to have big hearts and never give up." Buddy's tail wagged gently, and in that simple gesture, everyone present understood that healing wasn't about forgetting the darkness. It was about choosing to believe in the light that remained. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the memorial garden as families gathered for the first annual Buddy Day celebration. It had been exactly 1 year since the rescue, and Millbrook County had chosen to mark the anniversary not with somber remembrance, but with joyful celebration of resilience, community, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and their 4-legged angels. Dorothy Patterson, now 74 and moving a bit slower, but with eyes still bright with purpose, stood at the podium that had been set up near Buddy's statue. Lucy, now 9, and radiating the confidence of a child who had learned she was truly loved and protected, held the microphone cord to keep it from tangling. "Friends and neighbors," Dorothy began, her voice carrying across the crowd of nearly 300 people who had come from across Alabama and beyond. "We gather today not to dwell on the darkness we faced, but to celebrate the light that carried us through it." Buddy sat at attention beside the podium, wearing a special blue ribbon that declared him Hero of the Year from the Alabama Canine Association. At 8 years old, he had developed a few gray whiskers around his muzzle, but his eyes remained alert and kind, constantly scanning the crowd with the protective instincts that had saved 6 lives. The celebration had drawn media attention from across the country, but this time the coverage felt different. Instead of sensationalizing the tragedy, reporters were focused on the remarkable transformation of a community that had faced its worst nightmare and emerged stronger. The Buddy Foundation had already helped establish similar programs in 12 counties, and Dorothy had been invited to speak at conferences about rural community resilience. Jake Sullivan, now Detective Sullivan, stood with his wife Sarah, a relationship that had blossomed from their shared experience of trauma and healing. They had married the previous spring in a ceremony where Buddy served as ring bearer, much to the delight of the entire community. Emma, now 10, had gained not just a stepmother, but a larger family that included all the rescued children and their families. "When I think about this past year," Jake addressed the crowd, "I'm reminded that heroism isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it's about showing up every day, about refusing to give up when hope seems impossible, about choosing love over fear, even when fear seems more reasonable." Amy Henderson, now 13 and serving as vice president of her middle school student council, had written and delivered a speech about the importance of listening to both animals and instincts. "Buddy taught us that communication doesn't always require words," she said. Sometimes the most important messages come from hearts that care enough to keep trying until someone finally understands. The rescued children had all continued their healing journeys with remarkable progress. Tyler Brooks, now 8, had indeed convinced his parents to adopt a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever named Hope, who had become his constant companion. Michael Rodriguez had started a small business training therapy dogs, working directly with Dr. Williams to help other traumatized children. Sarah Chen had channeled her experience into advocacy work, speaking at schools about recognizing when adults make children feel uncomfortable or unsafe. But perhaps the most powerful transformation had been in the community itself. The tragedy had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about isolation, mental health, and the ways that grief could twist good intentions into harmful actions. The Buddy Foundation's programs now included regular mental health screenings for anyone working with children, support groups for grieving parents, and community education about recognizing the warning signs of psychological distress. Dr. Williams had established a research program studying the therapeutic benefits of human-animal bonds in treating childhood trauma. Buddy had become the star of this research, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of each child's needs that continued to astound mental health professionals. He responds to trauma with exactly the right combination of comfort and strength, Dr. Williams explained to the gathered crowd. It's as if he understands that healing requires both safety and courage. The memorial garden had become a place of pilgrimage for families dealing with their own tragedies. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, and communities struggling with their own versions of betrayal and recovery came to find hope in Millbrook's story. The bronze statue of Buddy had been touched so many times by visitors seeking comfort that his bronze nose had developed a golden patina from countless grateful hands. Thomas Hendricks remained in psychiatric care, his condition showing little improvement. Dr. Mitchell reported that he had occasional moments of clarity where he seemed to understand the magnitude of his actions, but these were inevitably followed by retreats into delusion. Dorothy continued her monthly visits, finding in this practice a way to honor both the teacher he had been and the children he had harmed. "I go because someone needs to remember the good man he used to be," she explained to those who questioned her decision, not to excuse what he did, but to hold space for the complexity of human brokenness. We're all capable of both great love and terrible harm, depending on how we handle our pain. The day's celebration included demonstrations by other K-9 units from across the state, children's activities focused on animal safety and care, and a fundraising dinner for the Buddy Foundation. Local businesses had donated everything from barbecue to carnival rides, creating a festival atmosphere that celebrated life and community resilience. As the afternoon progressed, Jake found himself walking through the crowd with Buddy, observing the easy way the German Shepherd interacted with people of all ages. Children gravitated toward him naturally, while elderly visitors seemed to find comfort in his calm presence. Buddy had an uncanny ability to spend just the right amount of time with each person. Playful with those who needed joy, gentle with those who needed peace, alert with those who needed protection. "You know what amazes me most about that dog?" Dorothy said, joining Jake as they watched Buddy allow a group of preschoolers to use him as a climbing structure. He never developed hatred or fear, even after everything he went through. He just kept loving and protecting, as if that's the only response to pain that makes any sense. The day's festivities concluded with a candlelight ceremony as the sun set over the memorial garden. Each family lit a candle, not for mourning, but for hope. The rescued children stood together, no longer defined by their trauma, but strengthened by their survival and the love that had carried them through their darkest hours. Lucy Patterson, now confident and articulate, spoke on behalf of all the children. Buddy taught us that even when bad things happen, there are always good people and good dogs who will never stop looking for us, never stop protecting us, and never stop believing we're worth saving. As the crowd began to disperse, Dorothy remained in the garden with Lucy and Buddy, 3 generations of resilience sitting peacefully beneath the stars. The bronze statue seemed to glow in the moonlight, a permanent reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected forms, sometimes with badges and training, sometimes with 4 legs and an unbreakable spirit. "Grandma Dot," Lucy said softly, "do you think Buddy knows how many people he saved?" Dorothy smiled, watching as the German shepherd settled beside them with a contented sigh. "I think he knows something even more important, Sugar. He knows that love never gives up, that family is bigger than blood, and that sometimes the most broken hearts grow the strongest." In the distance, the lights of Millbrook County twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a family that had learned the true meaning of community, resilience, and unconditional love through the example of one extraordinary dog who refused to let the children cry alone in the darkness. Dear friends, if you've lived long enough to understand that life's greatest treasures aren't found in grand gestures but in daily acts of loyalty and love, you know the truth Buddy represents. In our golden years, we've learned that real heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they have 4 legs, gray whiskers, and hearts bigger than the world that tried to break them. Like Buddy, we've all faced abandonment, loss, and moments when giving up seemed easier than holding on. Yet here we are, still protecting those we love, still showing up when others need us most. That's the miracle of seasoned hearts. We transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths, our pain into purpose, our scars into wisdom that guides the next generation home. What moments in your own life taught you that true loyalty means never giving up on those you love? Have you ever had a pet or person who showed you that healing happens not by forgetting our pain, but by choosing to love anyway? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your wisdom matters, and your experiences can light the way for others walking similar paths.